16 and Away from Home by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 11, An Unwelcome Guest. February 11th, 1890. We have had a most horrendous week. SJ and I have had our patience tried to the absolute limit. We have a guest in the house, and even Jacob is beginning to look haunted.
Do you want to know what's streaming up the path?
It was time to leave for school, and Sarah Jane was looking out the window as she waited for me to be ready.
Not really, I replied, but I'm sure you're going to tell me anyway.
Mrs. Owens.
I rushed to the window.
What could she want at this hour of the morning?
Nothing good,
Sarah Jane predicted.
Although that has nothing to do with the time of day. She just radiates bad news.
We heard the door knocker and Letty admitting the visitor, but from our room it was impossible to hear the conversation going on below.
I'm going to hang over the banister,
Sarah Jane declared.
You can't do that,
I protested.
That's eavesdropping. Besides, Letty will probably tell us about it soon enough.
I was right. As soon as the door closed on Mrs. Owens departing back, Letty called to us.
Girls, I have something to discuss with you before you leave for school.
We'll be right down, Letty,
I replied. I turned to Sarah Jane.
Think fast. What have we done to Clarice lately that would bring her mother here to complain?
The only thing I ever do is ignore her,
Sarah Jane said.
She shouldn't complain about that. She doesn't know how lucky she is.
We descended the stairs and found Letty standing in the hallway, her face grim.
Mrs. Owens was just here, she stated. Her mother is very ill, and Gertrude and Mr. Owens must go with her. She wants Clarice to stay here while she is gone.
Sarah Jane gasped.
In this house? With us?
Letty nodded.
She said there was no other place to leave her. The minister's house has all boys, and every other place I suggested had something wrong with it. Gertrude insisted that Mrs. Clark would feel it was her duty to care for Clarice, so I had no choice. She is probably right about Aunt Rhoda,
Sarah Jane agreed.
She's always been partial to strays. Where's Clarice going to sleep?
I'll fix up the spare room, Letty sighed.
We'll have to do our best to make her feel welcome. Her father will bring her things over today, and she'll come home with you after school.
Offhand, I can't think of anything that could ruin my day faster than news like that,
I said as we walked to school.
I wonder how long her folks will be gone.
I was afraid to ask,
Sarah Jane said.
If we don't know for sure, we can pretend that every day is the last one.
The sullen look on Clarice's face when we entered the classroom indicated that she was no happier about the arrangements than we were. She glared at me as I sat down, but she didn't say anything.
Clarice acts as though I made her grandmother sick and on purpose to torment her,
I complained to the girls as we walked to our next class.
Why couldn't her mother have hired someone to stay in the house with her?
She probably knows what a slippery one Clarice is, Molly ventured. With 3 of you watching every move her daughter makes, she won't have to worry about her.
Count me out, I said. I'm not playing watchdog for anyone. Can you imagine what my life would be like if I meddled in her affairs?
We waited by the door after school to walk home with Clarice, but she turned on us angrily.
What are you standing there for? Do you think it's your responsibility to see that I get home safely?
We thought you might want to walk with us,
Sarah Jane said.
You thought wrong. I'm not that desperate for company. Just go on about your business.
She flounced off, leaving us staring at her in disbelief.
Well, so much for Be Nice to Clarice Day,
Sarah Jane said with a shrug.
I'm going to pretend that she isn't there.
We spread our books out on the dining room table where we usually studied and began the next day's lessons. For a couple of hours, I forgot about our unwelcome guest as I outlined a history chapter and worked on an English theme. Letty's voice interrupted my thoughts.
It's almost time for supper. Where do you suppose Clarice is? I don't know and I don't care, Sarah Jane replied. She's no concern of mine. I am responsible for her, Letty said. And she is going to have to know that we have rules here. One of them is to be on time when meals are served.
I felt sorry for Letty. If we acted as bad as Clarice did, Letty's problems would be tripled.
I'm sorry, Letty, I said. We really haven't had a very good attitude about this. We'll do our best to make Clarice happy while she's here.
Not me.
said Sarah Jane.
"Oh, yes, you will," I told her. "You can't talk about being a Christian unless you act like one. We'll just have to pray for extra patience."
"You're right, Mabel. I should be ashamed of myself. I'll straighten up and do better."
Just as Letty was about to send Jacob out looking, Clarice stomped into the hallway and slammed the door behind her.
"Where is my room?"
she demanded as Letty met her at the stairway.
"At the end of the hall upstairs," Letty told her. "And supper will be on the table in 5 minutes, so come right back down."
Not so much as a hello or how are you,
I thought to myself.
What is the matter with that girl?
Clarice did not reappear, and after we waited for a few minutes, I went to call her. Her door slammed and she came down the stairs as though she were walking to an execution. When she saw our books on the dining room table, she stopped.
"I thought you said supper was ready," she said. "The table isn't even set."
I pushed open the door to the kitchen.
"We eat out here with Letty and Jacob."
"You don't actually eat with the servants," she exclaimed.
"No, I eat with my friends. Will you sit down so we can get started?"
Clarice silently took her place and Jacob asked the blessing. We tried to carry on our usual conversation, but since Clarice would only mutter yes or no when someone spoke to her, it was a difficult meal. When we had finished, Jacob rose to get the Bible. Clarice got up and started for the door.
"We're going to have prayer," Letty told her. "Where are you going?"
"That's none of your business. I don't have to tell you where I'm going."
Sarah Jane's mouth dropped open, and I gasped in surprise. Jacob put the Bible on the table and spoke in a voice we had never heard before.
"You will not speak to my sister in that tone again as long as you remain in this house, young lady. It is our business to know where you are going, and you can be sure we will be minding it. Now sit down while we have family prayer. When we have finished," he added, "you will get your books and tend to your lessons."
The silence that followed this unaccustomed speech was so heavy that we could hear the gentle sizzle of steam from the tea kettle on the stove. Jacob adjusted his glasses and opened the Bible.
"Bring down your things and study with us,"
Sarah Jane suggested as we left the kitchen.
"I'll stay in my room, thank you,"
Clarice snapped. She marched up the stairs without a backward look.
"Whew,"
I said when she was gone.
"I thought for a minute Jacob was going to box her ears."
"If he spoke to me like that, I'd feel as though he had,"
Sarah Jane replied. We saw no more of Clarice that night. When we called goodnight through her closed door, we received only a mumble in return. I went to sleep thinking that the Lord certainly had his hands full with that one. Letty called us at the usual time in the morning, and we heard her rap on Clarice's door. Sarah Jane rolled over and groaned.
"You wouldn't believe the nightmares I had last night," she said. "I dreamed that Clarice burned the house down and Jacob put beds in the barn for us."
"Well, it's still standing," I replied. "Of course, the day isn't over yet."
When we went down for breakfast, Letty turned from the stove.
"Is Clarice coming?"
she asked.
"I didn't hear her moving around," I said. "Maybe she went back to sleep."
"I'll go get her,"
Sarah Jane offered.
"No," Letty decided. "She was called, same as you were. She's old enough to get herself out of bed."
We ate breakfast, brushed our teeth, gathered our books, and left for school. There was still no sound from Clarice's room. The first period was almost over when Clarice dashed into class and slid into her seat. She looked furious, and I knew her wrath would descend on me in a short time.
"Why didn't you get me up?"
she hissed.
"You just wanted to get me into trouble."
"Letty called you," I reminded her.
"We didn't know you needed someone to come in and roll you out of bed." "Oh, you think you're funny, don't you?" she snapped. "Well, let me tell you something. I'm not going to stay around and let a couple of old servants tell me what to do."
Clarice was on time for supper, but she still refused to be included in the conversation. As we expected, she retreated to her room immediately afterward.
"This isn't going to be as bad as I expected,"
Sarah Jane said as she opened her book.
"If we don't have to look at her except during meals, and she doesn't say anything then, we can almost imagine she isn't here."
"That's true," I admitted, "but that's not showing love to our neighbor. She needs to know that we really care about her.
Sarah Jane gazed at me.
Oh, all right, I said. So we don't really care about her. The point is, we're supposed to. She is a person, you know, and the Lord loves her.
He's the only one who could, Sarah Jane muttered, and we turned to our lessons. When we were ready for bed, we again called goodnight to Clarice through the door. This time, there was no sound in reply, not even a cross mumble. Sarah Jane fell asleep immediately, but I lay looking out the window. I had made no progress toward making Clarice my friend since school began. If anything, she was more hostile to me than ever. I had prayed about it daily, and I had been careful not to do anything to upset her if I could help it. What else could I do? It seemed like hours later, when I was about ready to doze off, that I heard a creaking sound in the hallway. My eyes flew open, and I listened intently. The front door opened and closed softly.
"Wake up,"
I said, poking Sarah Jane. "I don't want to," she replied.
"Sarah Jane, please, wake up. I think Clarice has left the house."
There was silence, and I thought she was still asleep. Then she spoke in a very wide-awake voice. "Mabel, if the only reason you woke me up was to tell me something I don't care to hear, I'm going to pound you."
"Whether you want to hear it or not, I think Clarice is gone. We've got to do something about it."
Sarah Jane turned over and pounded her pillow. "Good riddance."
"Come on," I insisted. "What shall we do? Should we wake up Letty?"
"Oh, Mabel," Sarah Jane groaned. "Why do you have to feel so responsible for everyone? There's nothing we could do to get her back if we found her. She's dug her own hole. Let her sleep in it." I could see there would be no help from that direction. I lay back down to ponder what to do next, but before I could reach a decision, I had fallen asleep. A sudden rattle on our window brought us both upright in bed. "What's that?" Sarah Jane gasped.
"Something hit the window," I replied. "What time is it?"
"How should I know?" Sarah Jane answered crossly. "I've been waked up so many times I'm not even sure what day it is anymore." We slid out of bed and went to the window. Standing below and looking up at us was Clarice. Sarah Jane lifted the sash and leaned out. "What in the world are you doing down there?"
"Never mind," Clarice replied. "Just come down and let me in."
"You got out without any help. Why don't you come back in the same way?"
"The door locked behind me. Hurry up, it's cold out here."
Sarah Jane closed the window and looked at me. "I don't believe this is happening. It's another nightmare, right?"
"Yes, but unfortunately it's not a sleeping one. And unless we go let her in, there won't be any more sleeping around here."
We went to the top of the stairs, and Sarah Jane ran down to open the door. When they came back up, I pulled Clarice into our room and shut the door.
"What are you doing anyway? Where have you been?" I demanded.
"It's none of," Clarice began, and then she looked down at the floor.
"I don't want to talk about it."
"I don't want to hear about it either," Sarah Jane told her. "But someone has to be told something. You can't be out running the roads in the middle of the night without—" The door opened and Letty put her head in. "Is someone sick up here?" she said anxiously. Then she spotted Clarice fully dressed. "Why, Clarice, haven't you been to bed? It's almost 1 o'clock. "She's—" Sarah Jane started to reply, but I interrupted.
"She had something to say to us," I finished. "She's going to bed right now. Aren't you, Clarice?"
Clarice nodded and left for her room. Letty looked confused and told us good night and went back downstairs. "Why did you cover for her?" Sarah Jane demanded. "She needs to be punished. I think Letty ought to know what she's doing."
"I thought maybe if she knew we weren't going to tell on her, she'd let us help her," I said.
"Ha!" Sarah Jane answered. "You know better than that. She hasn't any use for us or anyone else that I know of."
"Sarah Jane, how do you suppose we would have turned out if we had had Mrs. Owens for a mother?"
There was no answer, but I knew Sarah Jane was thinking it over. End of chapter 11.